Hello and welcome to a new show that I'm trying out. It's called Out of Focus, which is a pun on my name, The Crimson Blur. If you guys don't know me already, I'm a Smash player, TO, commentator. I still like to put player in that list, even though it hasn't been true for a while. The concept of the show is really simple. No editing, no production value, no work on my part. I'm not even going to clean my apartment. It's just going to be the Blur Unfiltered, the Blur talking, and the people listening, and that's what people care about. So I just want to get right into it. This week's topic, I think we're going to have like a topic a week, depending on if this goes well, if this isn't just a horrible disaster. This week's topic is actually going to be about top player floating and privileges, how we treat our top players and our celebrities, and this includes personalities and commentators as well, so I guess I'm lumped into that group. And how that compares to the fighting game community, which deals with their top players quite differently. They actually deal with them in a very different manner, and that's actually caused a lot of their TOs and leaders to look at what we're doing and react negatively to it, right? They're thinking, okay, Smash community, what are you really doing? And are you guys losing the focus of what makes the fighting game community, and if you include Smash within that, great, you know? Are we losing a part of our soul? And I think there is a lot of validity to their claims. We are losing some of our soul. That's absolutely true. I like to call it the red pill, blue pill moment. We got bigger, but there were naturally a lot of disadvantages to that as well as advantages. Everyone likes to talk about the advantages. Our venues are bigger, our tournaments are better. There's more viewership, there's more new players. All these things are great, but there is other consequences that come with that. There's a recent article that I guess I can link into the description that talks about some of those points, and actually I think it's relatively accurate, and says, what are the pros and cons of getting bigger as a scene? And one of the things that we've seen as we've gotten bigger as a scene is that there's become a celebritization, especially because of the documentary and just the type of focus it put on those players and the different type of content pieces that came afterwards, right? Like we see Leffy getting a documentary of his own recently that's going to be out on Red Bull. Smash personalities are treated very differently than they were in the past, and so where in the past, a player just goes into a room, goes into like a 17-man local, 20-man local, whatever. And sits down and plays with anyone, and everyone's cool, and everyone's just chilling. It's not really that big a deal. Now it's become, a much different environment where new players, spectators, whatever, they want autographs, they want to play friendlies with their favorite players, they want to talk to them, all this stuff. And that's great. I think top player fan interaction is actually super important, but it's exactly that. It's a top player and a fan, and I think in the past it was mostly a player to a player, and that dynamic has changed. And that's just a natural consequence of getting bigger. It's not a surprise. You see it in any sport or esport as it happens. But I think the big question that I have, and I'm not convinced of, is are we actually to that point? And to what level do we need to be making those compromises? Are we getting there too soon? And why are we getting there too soon if we are? And I think that last point is actually what matters the most. So how did we get here? And I think the big difference between the FGC and Smash, I think, is not necessarily the celebritization of the two, and I think that is a difference, but it's not like Justin Wong and Mike Ross aren't super popular. Trust me, they are. Everyone loves them. They can barely walk through a venue too. They have that degree of celebrity too. Don't make no mistake, right? I think the biggest difference is the power dynamic between a tournament organizer in the FGC and a player versus the power dynamic between a tournament organizer and a player in the Smash community. So the reason why we see TOs giving way and making way for players over time in the Smash community is because the TOs actually have very little leverage in comparison to the FGC. So in the FGC, let's say there are 8 games at an event, and that means there are 8 set of top players. That naturally dilutes the amount of power players will have. If your Mortal Kombat player complains, well, whatever, just don't go, bro. We have these 7 other games, and we can treat, their top players are still going to come. So, you're just losing out yourself. Whereas in Smash, you lose Mango, you kind of lose a lot of the heart of the tournament. You lose Hungrybox, you lose a big part of the competition, right? You lose a large part of your storyline that really puts your tournament all together. So there's that. And then there's also the Capcom Pro Tour for the Street Fighter, part of those events, which gives TOs a lot more leverage. So let's say you're a premier event on the Capcom Pro Tour, and a player says, "Hey, I don't want to come unless you give me a VIP room, unless you give me an appearance fee, unless you give me this, that, or the other." The TO can just go, "Okay, you're lost. You're not going to make it into Capcom Cup because you're not going to my event. And last I checked, if you don't make it into Capcom Cup, you're not really a pro player, and you're probably going to lose your sponsor. So, GG. Good luck. Have fun not going to my tournament, but." At the end of the day, they have a lot more leverage because Capcom is the one who is mandating an overall structure on the scene and equalizing that power dynamic, right? In Smash, when a TO talks to a player and when a TO is doing their promotion for an event, they have so little leverage, and that's really that's their golden goose. They're going to have a hard time getting attendance and getting people to think that they're a major, because everyone wants to be a major nowadays. Unless they have the Mangoes and Hungryboxes and Armadas and whatever at their event, so they'll do anything to get them there, right? And really, players have even more leverage than they think they do, right? If Armada told people, "Hey, I'm not going to go to your event unless you fly out Android every time," I think Android's going to get flown out every single time, is my honest opinion. If Hungrybox said, "You know what, I want blue M&Ms removed from my bowl of M&Ms, I need that to deliver to me at my hotel room every day," TOs are going to do that. They're going to assign an M&M fetcher at their event because they need Hungrybox at their event, or else they're not really a major. They're not going to get attendance. They understand how much they need those players to succeed. There are a few exceptions to this, thankfully, because the players are pretty good people. Thankfully, we've been mostly propped up by a system. There's been this imbalance, but the players haven't taken as much advantage of it as they could have. For the most part, I think they've been treating TOs rather equitably. They're nice guys. And I know people like me, Joe Guy, etc. have far more leverage because we have a social media presence and we have a presence on the mic. And also, we're just friends with these guys, so we can kind of just tell them, do stuff, and then for the most part, they'll listen. So a lot of these problems end up working themselves out, but if you're a no-name TO from Podunk area and you really need a player out, you have to make a lot of concessions. And so what are these types of privileges? What are the privileges we're talking about in particular? And how have they evolved over the years? So the most basic type of privilege, the one that we most commonly accept, is seeding. Instead of using the word privilege, I should say things which make being a top player better. Being things we do because of skill differences and in the ecosystem. So seeding is actually a privilege by that definition, right? So why do certain players get a better spot in the bracket than others? Like, why does Armada get a better shot at winning the tournament than someone else? And I mean, you can just look at Shine very recently as an example. Mewtwo won that tournament without beating a god. He beat SFAT twice, and SFAT played like a god. He played better than the gods, technically. I mean, he beat two of them. But Mewtwo won that tournament without beating a god. And there's people who have positive records on SFAT over the last year and a half who, if they were given Mewtwo seed position, could have potentially also won that tournament, right? If you just look at the numbers. Now, I'm not sure if they would have beaten SFAT that day because he was so good. But seeding means that much, right? You could win a tournament because you didn't have to play as many hard players back to back to back, right? That is naturally a factor. It's easier to beat 2 gods than 4 gods, right? And we see this naturally. So the better skill you are, the more likely you're gonna make it to the end. Not only because of your skill, but even if you were actually of even skill with someone else and seeded differently, you will naturally do better. So seeding is a privilege, naturally, right? Other things is aid with travel. Sometimes top players get flown out. It always pains me when I see this because I see that concession, because I feel like that's what the esports teams are there to do in many ways. But some top players, either they have a stipend from their team which they've exceeded for the month and say, hey, I need to get flown out if I'm going to go to this, or this isn't worth it to me unless I get flown out. So we see aid with travel a lot, accommodations and housing and stuff like that. Pop bonuses, yes, pop bonuses in a weird way is a privilege because they serve nobody but the top. They're there to bring more top players in, just like any of these other privileges. VIP rooms, I'm going to touch on that later because that's been a topic. After parties, usually nowadays many events, if not most, have after parties associated with them. So did Shine, for example, and I know all the Twitch ones have had them too. I know. I've organized all but one of the after parties in Smash so far, so if anyone's to blame for that one's me. And top players usually get VIP wristbands, or they get actually invited to the party, whereas a regular attendee might not be able to, and that just makes their experience a little bit better for the event. Things like coaching and resources. If you're a top player, you might have a coach, you might have people helping you get better, whereas if you're a lower level player, you are kind of on your own, right? Unless you have a few friends that are just like good homies and they're trying to help you out, but they're not quite as dedicated to it, and they won't take multi-hour Skype calls like Captain Crunch will with HBox, for example, right? Someone who's actually hired by Liquid to do this job. That's a very different dynamic, right? So there's that, and finally there's floating, which is my least favorite, where you just float people ahead of the bracket because you assume a top player is not really going to lose in round 1 pools. Why waste anyone's time? Let's put them ahead. Maybe block other things off with their time there instead. So to touch on floating, because I just mentioned that I don't like it very much. The reason why I don't like it very much is not what it represents. I liked tier tournaments a lot. I think tier tournaments are the future, and I think a separation between the different classes of player, whether through amateur classes and pro classes, is actually super important for us as our attendance starts to balloon. I think I want events to start looking at ideas like bronze, silver, gold, platinum, etc. classes, and exactly how we can shape our tournaments to kind of feed those bracketing classes for each other, set goals for every tier, things like that. I've talked about this before, but in general, I think tier tournaments are the future. Now, what is the difference between that and the raw floating we're doing now? Well, the main difference is it's unfair. It's really unfair, actually. And sure, I don't think Armando's going to lose in round 1 pools, but he still should be put through that test. And more importantly, number 32 on that seeding chart is... I don't see a clear distinction between them and number 33, that they deserve that big of an advantage. And most people say, well, that's not actually that big of an advantage. But if it's not that big of an advantage, then why are we doing it in the first place, right? What is the purpose of doing it other than, okay, you're saying to give top players more time, sure. But what are we using that time for? What is the purpose of this in the first place? In many cases, there's next to no argument. When it was first done in Genesis, there was at least some sort of argument, right? Genesis, they have the draft crews. They were like, well, we can't do draft crews, this cool idea we want to do, because of how much everyone's time will be occupied by pools, so they floated players out knowing that they would likely make it out anyways, right? Well, for Genesis, that makes sense, right? Because they had something else to put the players in. But what events are doing now is saying, hey, maybe we'll give you an autograph session periods as signing time, which so far haven't been very well advertised. And when they do happen, I honestly feel like they're overblown. As much as that people get harassed for autographs and stuff like that, I don't see why they can't play 2 hours of pools and then do their 1 hour of autographs on the same day. It really doesn't have to be one or the other. An autograph session doesn't take so long that you have to block off someone's day for it, right? And for the most part, the time gained from someone, skipping pools hasn't been really used properly. Ultimately, the pros really don't like waking up early to do pools, don't really see the point why they'd have to be there on that Friday, and that's the crux of it, right? The pros are putting pressure on the TOs because they feel like, hey, especially if they have a job, why should I take a day off my job just to play players that I'm going to beat anyway? When I'm not going to get, views on stream for those matches, it's very likely not going to be streamed, so I don't get any exposure from my sponsors. What is it in it for me is really the question that the pros would ask for going through that early portion of the bracket. And I think that's a valid concern. What is in it for them? That's a good question, right? And that's where I think those tiered bracket systems do make more sense. It adds a lot of fatigue to them. They don't want to travel that extra. They don't want to have to be in the venue for that long. All that stuff. There are things we could do to fix that. Like something I've suggested multiple times is why not run your round 1 pools and immediately after it have your round 2 pools. So people play both round of pools back to back. So you play more matches in a row. So if you're a top player, you play your 2 hours of round 1 and then you play your 2 hours of round 2. And guess what? You're already where you would be in most tournament formats halfway through day 2 in the first 4 hours of the event, right? And what that does also in terms of content schedule is you can actually only stream round 2 pools. You don't have to stream round 1 pools at all. This is possible. This progression system is possible. I expand on that a little bit more later. But the idea is that I think that people are looking at, the demand and how unfair it is, and not why pro players are asking for it. And if we listen to why they're asking for it, then we can figure out systems as a middle ground. Ultimately, it's super unfair the way floating is done right now. We don't have a point structure. We don't have a circuit. We don't have something like Capcom Pro Tour, which could make it fair to float players out potentially, right? Something where, hey, they earned it from previous events. You can float them forward because of that. That's at least a little bit more fair, and a little bit more justifiable than, hey, I arbitrarily think that Reno is better than Tafo, right? And me personally, I don't know which of those 2 players is better. I don't know, right? They'd probably do better in certain matchups. But I know that at Shine, one was floated and one wasn't, right? And that doesn't really make much sense to me. I don't know who's really better than the other. I think seeding should have an influence. It already has an influence in our events. I already talked about it as a privilege, but it's a necessary thing we have to do because we do the double elim format. But it doesn't need to go this far. This is going a little too far. It's a little too arbitrary to me, and that's why I don't like it. So I prefer if events don't do that, especially when they don't have a really good reason for it. And I don't think that any event since Genesis has had a good reason for it, right? They've been largely done for the wrong reasons. So I've been pushing back on it for a while. As far as VIP rooms go, because that's another one of those hot button topics of why people do them, I think that having a practice area by the stage has proven to be really useful for organizers. So one problem we've had for the longest time is we have this job called the stream runner, right? The stream runner is basically the stage manager of a production. They queue up the next match. They try to, have everything, in line so that the production is snappy, right? And when you have those back rooms right by the production, what you do is you give the players a few setups, they play on them while they're on cue for their set. As a matter of fact, while they're 2-3 sets out from being on cue for their set. And they get to play there and the streamer doesn't have to go out into the crowd and find players, doesn't have to call people on their phone, doesn't have to go into hotel rooms to find players. All these absurd, ridiculous things that no one wants to do. When all the players are put into one place, it's much more convenient for the production, right? So that's the number one reason to do it. It's actually by far the best reason to do it. The number one con that I've been seeing, and something that I want to be reeled back, is I know me personally at Shine and many other events, with the Fox, for example, I spent almost all of my time in that VIP area, right? Battle of the Five Gods, I spent almost 100% of my time in that VIP area. And it makes sense, right? You got hella setups, you have no friendly rotation. At Shine, I'm not even that good. I played against Korean DJ for an hour on a setup, right? If I went to the big crowd, I'd have to go in a 4-man rotation. Who really wants to do that? I know I don't. So it's great. I get to play on a setup, and I don't really this whole players coming up to me and giving me and asking for autograph stuff. I don't really care about that. Whenever a fan comes up to me, I think it's super cool and we have a conversation. So that's not why I'd be back there. I'd be back there because I get to play against Korean DJ. That's dope. Right? And all the other players are back there. And by the way, there's probably snacks back there, water or whatever. You give the Blur some goldfish and some water and some trail mix, and I'll be there playing Smash all the time, right? You give me Korean DJ to play against especially, I'm there the whole day. So, of course, the players just stay back there the whole event. And that's actually super corrosive, right? When the top players are flown to an event for the express purpose of promoting the event and making the event bigger, and they sit back there, usually don't tweet for the duration of the event, especially when they're not interacting with everyone else. None of the people who want to interact with them or see their matches or even see their friendlies get the chance to. It's not really good for building a community. I do think that's a super negative. I know whenever they do go out of that VIP room and they go into a setup and to play, a crowd of like hundreds swarms around them to watch Mango play friendlies, for example, and warm up for his match, or Muchiking play his pools match, whatever. Like, those things are really good for the community. Everyone wants to go and watch those players, but they're going to play those friendlies in a back room, and then none of the fans can watch that. And I do think that's not so great. Maybe that's just a natural consequence, but I would like to see players at the very least spend more time outside the VIP room. Those autograph sessions are great, but I'd like to see them fulfilled more, right? I want to see sponsor obligations fulfilled more. I want to see fan interaction fulfilled more. I want to see all those things being done to a much greater degree if we're going to make that concession, right? It needs to be balanced out, right? We have to attack it from both angles. And especially, one thing I saw at what the Fox did, I really didn't like, and started yelling at some people for, is what some top players did is when they had a pools match, instead of playing on their pool setup where people can watch, is they pulled their pool opponent into the back room and played them there. And so basically none of the fans could watch. It was a little bit more comfortable for them because there was no one, jeering behind them, all this stuff. They didn't have to deal with all this stuff. And they already knew they had an open setup back there, so they just did it. But ultimately it defeats the purpose of the VIP room. That's not in the heart of why it's there. It doesn't make too much sense there, so I guess what I'm saying here is, as a whole, I think top player privilege is something that's a reality. It's something we have to deal with, especially as long as our ecosystem is balanced as it is. I think things like VIP rooms, I already explained a positive of it. That is an undeniable positive, and it is really good for keeping players in practice, making sure that their conditions are met. Things like that, they're good. It's good in many ways, but it does have those negatives, and I think that players and spectators who are arguing against that, they're right too. It's just two right people talking to each other, right? And I think the middle ground is really what we're looking for here. Similarly with floating, and I think that has less of a middle ground. I think that we shouldn't be doing it at this point, but we need to look at why top players would have a problem with the current format and what it means for their time and for their stamina. If they have a 2,000 man bracket or 3,000 man bracket, as it probably will be in 2017, to go through, just think about how many matches that means they have to play, right? What about their stamina? What about, the performance they'll have in top 8 when they're exhausted from playing just so many matches? These sort of things, I understand. We have to find a middle ground. I get it, right? But we also have to recognize that the argument's always going to be one-sided, except for people like me who represent the TOs and can at least be sort of a voice for them. The TOs almost never get an argument, right? They don't really get their voices heard on this. For the most part, we hear the masses, aka the most upvoted comment on Reddit, and we hear the top players, and the TOs are kind of left out. Their opinions kind of moot. And I think that's the point that the side I'd love to represent more and explain more from their angle, right? So these privileges exist. Ultimately, top player conditions are going to have to improve, keep improving over time. I think that's a good thing. It is inspiring even if you're a new player. You're like, hey, I want to get to that point so I can have this or that. But I think we're also going about it way too soon, and we're doing it way too soon, mostly because of those imbalances. I think many of the problems that are being stated as problems for top players are exaggerated, and for the size of our scene, don't need to happen quite as quickly, right? And especially, you see bigger scenes, like let's say the NBA, professional sport, right? They have a developmental league, they have top players, aka NBA ballers, that like professional players doing boot camps with kids. We saw, just in Rio, a few weeks ago, I saw Carmelo Anthony, videos of Carmelo Anthony playing with kids in Brazil, right? Like, and teaching them how to play basketball. That's dope. We need more of that, right? And we need that imbalance to be brought to the fold, right? Like, we need top players to take a little more responsibility for growing the scene. And I don't think most of them or any of them are really doing that right now. And okay, I shouldn't say any of them, but most of them aren't doing that right now. Most of them are acting out of self-interest. A lot of the things that that are being done, like content creation, streaming, things like that, do help the scene for sure. But I don't see much of the two-way coaching going on, right? I don't see. I worry for our player progression and how easy it will be for a new player to start approaching that top echelon with the way our systems are going, right? If the difference between being a low-level player and a top player is seeding plus floating plus you don't have access to coaches, plus you're probably not full-time yet, so you have about a fraction of the time to deal with it, and there is no developmental leagues, there's no ways of really progressing you as a player. I worry that we're going to be left with the same 32 people for years, right? And I don't think that's good for and healthy for an esport. I think there's a quote from Carmack that I really like that says the sign of a healthy esport is how many new faces you see every year. That's a paraphrase, but the point is that if you're going to be a healthy esport, you need to have new pros, new commentators, new TOs, all that coming in at all times. Or else you don't really have that churn. You see more of the same over and over again. So far, I've been pretty good at that. But I think if there's a bigger difference and a bigger gap between the top and the low level, we're always going to have this problem, right? And furthermore, I think that while I think that top players should have responsibilities to feed back in the scene, I think that there is a responsibility from the lower end players to deal with that celebrity politely. And I think for the most part, they actually do. I think most of those stories are pretty exaggerated. I mean, I hang out in the VIP rooms. I see how Mango, Music King, blah, blah, blah get treated. There are isolated stories, but it's not nearly as bad as what like Lil Wayne has to deal with, Nicki Minaj has to deal with. Real A-list celebrities that outside of Smash venues. It can get a little intrusive, but dude, it's part of the job, right? It is part of the job. You only have to deal with it usually a couple times a week. It's something that everyone has to deal with. It's with all the positives comes that negative. I hate calling it a negative. It doesn't seem like a negative to me. So dealing with fans should be something that people want to do. And to our credit, I think that while we have tried to improve the top player experience, and I think Shine was used as an example for all this, which is just kind of odd to me, because Shine of all tournaments probably had the best amateur experience we've had yet. We tried something new at that event called the lane shift. If you guys missed it, look at the documentation for the lane shift to see what exactly they did there. But basically, we did sit-and-go brackets, tiered sit-and-go brackets, which was kind of like a casual ladder of sorts for after you got eliminated from the tournament. I have never seen an FGC event implement this. Matter of fact, most FGC events don't implement amateur brackets. They've never done round robin pools like we used to do in the past. They haven't really tried to mold their amateur scene quite like we have. So I think that on that aspect, I think that FGC needs to take a little bit of reflection and think, okay, maybe we treat our top players too kindly, but we treat our amateurs better too. And I think that's actually maybe a tautology. It might be just true, because at least in my experience at FGC events, I haven't seen them try to put effort into that feedback loop, right? I don't see ideas like lane shift. I don't see ideas like that being promoted, and I think there's technology nowadays to do it. So I'd love to see their scenes take some of our ideas and implement it at their events, right? So ultimately, I think the amateur experience is going to get better. I think that there are smart people working hard to make sure that the stakeholders are all happy and everything is met in a middle ground. And unfortunately, there is no clear-cut solution to this sort of thing. This is more of like an ecosystem problem. And the real takeaway from this is that we have to attack it from both angles, where we have to be like, hey, we're going to do the lane shift, and we're going to the VIP room, but hey, VIPs, you also have to commit to this, that, and the other responsibility because we want to have the fans to have some pro player interaction in between there. You especially can't do things like at Clutch City Clash where the pros don't even show up for a day or two because for the first day because of floating, right? Like things like that can't happen, right? Like you can't get flown out to an event and not show up the first day. That's like unexcusable. That's very unprofessional, and it's not something we could really have as a community. You know, and it especially shows some of the weaknesses of floating. Maybe having them at the event for some pointless matches is better than having them, not having them there at all, right? Which is even worse, right? So I think ultimately we have to like weigh those differences, and we also have to try to find a voice for TOs and a platform for TOs to really express themselves a little bit better and have a little bit more unification so that TOs aren't competing against each other for these players so much, and you know, getting kind of tossed around by players to do this or that, and maybe even potentially change their formats, you know, their tournament formats just to appease certain players. I don't think that's a good sign. I don't think that's smart for our community. It's not a good sign for our future, and I want to see more of a balance out of it. So, you know, I made this video. I hope you guys liked it. Tell me what you think. I hope I made some good points. I know that I always have the commentator's curse where I do these sort of rants, but I wanted to maybe bite-size it as I think this video actually went a little long, but make it smaller so that it's more consumable for people because the commentator's curse is definitely a slog. It's more of a podcast. And I'll see you guys later. Hopefully this went well. All right. Peace out.